At Han & Lee Group, CEO Kang Jae-won is known for his cold precision and ruthless expectations. So when his new assistant, Eun Ha-ri, quiet, plainly dressed, and seemingly unimpressive, accidentally spills coffee on an investor's contract, he punishes her in front of the entire board. Play the grand piano at the gala, or lose her job. What he doesn't expect is the moment her fingers touch the keys. The room falls silent, and so does his heart. But why would someone with such soul in her music be hiding in silence? And what past did she bury so deeply? Only melody can speak it. The chandeliers of... Before we dive into the story, take a moment to leave a comment letting us know which city you're watching from. And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. The chandeliers of the Han & Lee Group's grand ballroom glittered like 1,000 stars caught in crystal cages. It was a night designed for power, prestige, and perfect appearances. The company's annual gala was not merely an event. It was a battlefield of influence where every handshake was a contract, every smile a negotiation, and every whispered word could change the course of millions. At the center of it all stood Kang Jae-won, the CEO whose very presence commanded silence. Tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, his dark eyes were sharp enough to slice through the bravest investor. People both admired and feared him. He was the man who had doubled the company's value in just 5 years, the strategist who never faltered, the perfectionist who tolerated no mistakes. His reputation was legendary and merciless. And yet just a few steps behind him stood Eun Ha-ri. She kept her gaze lowered, her plain dress blending into the background as though she longed to disappear into the walls. She was his assistant, the one tasked with managing schedules, fetching coffee, arranging documents, and standing invisible in a world that rarely noticed the quiet ones. If anyone had looked closely, they might have seen her hands trembling as she clutched her notepad. Because earlier that day, a terrible mistake had sealed her fate. In the rush of preparing contracts for one of the company's most influential investors, Eun Ha-ri had tripped, spilling a cup of coffee across the table. The liquid spread like wildfire, staining not just the polished wood, but also the crisp signature pages of a multi-million-dollar deal. Gasps had echoed through the boardroom, and silence had fallen heavier than stone. Everyone had turned to look at her. And then, to him. Kang Jae-won's face had remained calm, unreadable, but his words had struck like thunder. "Tonight," he said, in a voice that carried no emotion, "you will stand before our guests and play the piano. If you refuse, consider your employment terminated." The board had murmured in shock. Some smirked, already anticipating the humiliation of a timid assistant fumbling in front of Seoul's most powerful elite. Now, under the dazzling lights of the gala, Eun Ha-ri's heart pounded so fiercely she feared everyone could hear it. The polished surface of the grand piano gleamed at the far end of the ballroom, its black lacquer reflecting the golden light. It might as well have been a guillotine waiting for her. She had not touched a piano in years, not since the days when music was her breath and her heartbeat, before life had stolen it all away. Her knees weakened at the memory. Jae-won's eyes found her across the room. They were steady, cold, expectant. To him, this was not about music. It was about control, about making a point. In his world, failure was weakness, and weakness had no place beside him. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please turn your attention to the stage. Tonight, we have a very special performance. CEO Kang Jae-won's assistant, Miss Eun Ha-ri, will grace us with a piece on the piano." Polite applause scattered through the crowd, though many chuckled behind their hands. A few whispered bets on how long it would take before she stumbled. The air carried a cruel anticipation, as if every guest longed for entertainment at the expense of one trembling woman. Ha-ri's hands felt icy, her breath shallow. Every step toward the piano felt like walking into fire. She could not run, not with her job, her dignity, her survival hanging in the balance. The grand ballroom seemed impossibly large as she crossed it. Crystal chandeliers swung gently with the motion of air, scattering fragmented light across the faces of Seoul's wealthiest. Some women leaned toward one another, whispering, their jeweled earrings catching the glow. Men adjusted their ties, smirking, waiting to be entertained by her disgrace. She lowered herself onto the piano bench. Her fingers hovered above the ivory keys, pale against the polished surface. The murmurs quieted, but the weight of 100 gazes pressed down on her shoulders. A thought whispered inside her mind. What if I fail? What if this is the end? But another voice, quieter yet stronger, rose from a place deep within. What if you remember who you are? What if this moment is not your end, but your beginning? Ha-ri closed her eyes. Memories rushed in, her mother humming lullabies, her tiny fingers stumbling across keys, her first recital in a crowded hall, the applause that had once filled her with light. The music had always been her language, her soul, her secret truth. And tonight, though it had been forced upon her, it was once again hers. Her fingers pressed the first chord. The sound drifted into the room, soft but clear, like the first drop of rain breaking silence. A ripple passed through the crowd. Their laughter halted, their whispers died. She began to play. The melody rose gently at first, trembling like a fragile bird testing its wings. Then it soared, notes cascading in waves of emotion, filling the grand hall with a power that words could not touch. Each phrase carried sorrow, longing, hope, her life's hidden chapters pouring out through her hands. Guests froze mid-sip, their glasses suspended in the air. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Even those who had planned to mock her felt their throats tighten as the music seized them. And at the center of it all, Kang Jae-won stood unmoving, his arms folded, his face as unreadable as ever. But inside, something unexpected stirred. For years he had built walls of ice around his heart. Efficiency, logic, control, those were his weapons. Yet as Ha-ri played, a fissure cracked through the frost. The melody reached places he had buried long ago, places he swore no one would ever touch again. He remembered his mother's hands, delicate against piano keys. He remembered nights as a child, lying awake while music drifted from the living room, wrapping him in warmth he never admitted he missed. And now, this assistant, this woman he had considered insignificant, was awakening it all. The song grew bolder, swelling with passion. It was not a performance for applause. It was a confession, a diary, a wound opening and healing at the same time. Her hands moved with a certainty she did not know she still possessed, as though the piano had been waiting all these years for her return. People who had dismissed her minutes ago now leaned forward, their eyes glistening. The atmosphere in the hall shifted. The grandeur of wealth and power faded, replaced by something raw and human. When the final note lingered and dissolved into silence, the room remained hushed for a heartbeat, as though no one dared breathe. Then the applause erupted, thunderous and unrestrained. Ha-ri's chest heaved with the effort, her vision blurred with unshed tears. She had not played for them. She had not played for him. She had played for herself, for the part of her she thought was gone forever. But when her eyes lifted, they met Jae-won's. For the first time, his gaze was not cold. It was searching, questioning, perhaps even shaken. The master of ceremonies beamed. What a remarkable surprise! Miss Eun Ha-ri, ladies and gentlemen. The crowd cheered again, but Ha-ri barely heard it. The sound of her own heart roared louder, thundering with both fear and strange relief. She rose from the bench, bowing politely before stepping away. She wanted nothing more than to disappear into the crowd, to find a quiet corner where no one would ask her questions. But she felt Jae-won's gaze following her, heavy and unrelenting. What had she just revealed? And why did it feel as if her life had just changed forever? The applause still thundered long after Eun Ha-ri stepped away from the piano. She lowered her head, trying to escape the sea of eyes that now followed her with fascination. Just minutes ago, those same eyes had expected her humiliation. Now they glimmered with curiosity, with questions, with awe she had never invited. The gala resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. The music had not only silenced laughter, it had left behind a reverence no one could quite shake off. A few investors approached her as she tried to retreat into the corner of the room. "That was extraordinary," one woman whispered, clutching her jeweled necklace as though the music still echoed in her chest. "Why are you working as an assistant?" a man asked, brows raised. "With talent like that?" Ha-ri forced a polite smile, bowing quickly before slipping away. Compliments felt like needles against her skin. The further she moved from the piano, the tighter the walls closed around her. She had not wanted to reveal herself, not like this, not in front of him, but she could feel his gaze across the room. Kang Jae-won had not moved, not spoken. He stood like a statue carved of stone, eyes fixed on her even as conversations swirled around him. Those who noticed his silence assumed he was calculating, as always. But deep inside, something unfamiliar gnawed at him. When the night ended, chauffeurs lined up outside the glass doors. Guests filed out, still buzzing about the surprise performance. Ha-ri kept her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, hoping to vanish into the shadows. But as she reached the steps, a voice called firmly behind her. "Miss Eun Ha-ri." She froze. Turning slowly, she found Jae-won standing at the top of the stairs. His expression gave nothing away, but his eyes, those eyes held something unreadable. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," he said simply. 9 sharp. It was not a request. The next day, the atmosphere in the office was nothing like before. Word of her performance had spread like wildfire. Assistants, managers, even senior directors whispered as she walked past. Normally invisible, she now felt exposed under every stare. "Did you hear? She played like a professional. I didn't even know she could do that. Maybe that's why the CEO keeps her around. Who knows what else she's hiding?" Ha-ri kept her eyes on the floor, clutching the files to her chest as if they could shield her. She hated attention. It had never brought her anything good. At precisely 9, she knocked on the heavy door to Jae-won's office. "Enter," came his low reply. She stepped inside. The vast office was sleek, cold, dominated by glass and steel. He sat at his desk, scrolling through figures on his tablet, as though she were already late. "Sit," he commanded, not looking up. She obeyed, perching on the chair across from him. Her fingers knotted together in her lap. Finally, he lifted his eyes. For a moment, silence stretched between them. His gaze was sharper than ever, but behind it, a question lingered. "Why?" he said at last. "Have you hidden this?" Ha-ri blinked. "Sir?" "The piano," he continued, his voice calm but heavy. "Your performance last night. That was not the skill of a hobbyist. That was discipline, years of training. You could have been—" He stopped, pressing his lips together. "Why are you here, working as an assistant?" Her throat tightened. Of all the questions she feared, this one cut deepest. "I don't play anymore," she said softly. "It's not who I am now." He leaned back, studying her. "You think you can erase something like that? Talent does not vanish just because you bury it." Her eyes dropped to her lap. "With respect, Mr. Kang, my past is not relevant to my work here." A long pause. Then his voice lowered. "It is now." She looked up, startled. "I want you to accompany me to upcoming events," he said. "Board dinners, investment galas. You will continue your duties as my assistant, but also as entertainment." The word stung. She flinched. "Entertainment?" His brow twitched. "Do you prefer musician? Whatever you call it, you will play." Ha-ri's chest tightened. "And if I refuse? Then you can find employment elsewhere," he said evenly. But understand this, last night changed how people see you, and how they see me. That performance reflected on my leadership. Investors are intrigued. Do not mistake it for a choice. It is an opportunity. She swallowed hard, torn between indignation and fear. Her job had been her only anchor. She could not lose it. But neither could she bear the thought of standing exposed, night after night, under the weight of expectation. Jae-won leaned forward, his voice quieter. You have 2 days to prepare. Do not disappoint me again. Dismissed, Ha-ri rose on trembling legs, bowing before leaving his office. As the door clicked shut behind her, her heart hammered in confusion. She had wanted to remain invisible. But now, she was being dragged into a light she had long abandoned. That evening, she sat in her small apartment, staring at the old piano against the wall. Dust coated the lid. She had not touched it in years. She traced the edge with her fingertip, her mind swirling with fragments of memory. Her father's stern voice. Music won't feed you. Her mother's tired smile. Play for yourself, Ha-ri. Always for yourself. The day she walked away from competitions, vowing never to return. Her chest ached. She pressed one key. The sound was brittle, uneven. Yet even in its imperfection, it tugged at her heart. Tears pricked her eyes. She whispered to the empty room. Why did you make me do this, Mr. Kang? Meanwhile, across the city, Kang Jae-won stood alone in his penthouse, staring out over the glittering skyline. The city stretched beneath him like a map he controlled. But for once, control felt elusive. He poured himself a drink, though he rarely did. The amber liquid swirled in the glass, catching the city lights. He should have been reviewing tomorrow's reports. Instead, his mind kept replaying the sound of her music. It unsettled him. He prided himself on clarity, on never being swayed by sentiment. Yet the image of her at the piano, the fragility of her frame, the fire in her hands, lingered like a shadow he could not shake. Why did it matter? She was an assistant, replaceable, and yet he had felt something he could not name. Back in the office, rumors only grew. Colleagues whispered that the CEO seemed different, distracted. Some wondered if he was favoring Ha-ri. She heard their murmurs every time she passed by, and it made her shrink further into herself. Only Park Ji-eun, a kind-hearted colleague, dared to approach her directly. Ha-ri, Ji-eun whispered at lunch. Is it true? You used to be a pianist. Ha-ri hesitated, then nodded faintly. Ji-eun smiled warmly. I knew you were hiding something. You always had that quiet grace. Don't let anyone shame you for it. Her kindness stung, because Ha-ri knew the truth. Music was not grace for her anymore. It was a wound. Still, when Friday night arrived and she stood once again in front of a polished piano at a private investor dinner, she forced her trembling hands to play, and once again, silence fell. The private investor dinner ended much the same way as the gala had, in stunned silence followed by a burst of admiration. The audience, wealthy and hardened by years of deals and negotiations, had not expected to be moved. Yet when Eun Ha-ri lifted her hands from the piano, their applause was genuine, almost reluctant, as though they could not believe how much a simple melody had shaken them. She bowed quickly, cheeks burning, and slipped back into the shadows of the room. She longed to return to anonymity, but she knew that possibility was gone. Too many eyes followed her now. Too many whispers trailed behind her. From his seat at the head of the table, Kang Jae-won remained motionless. He neither applauded nor smiled, but his gaze lingered on her, sharp and unreadable. To the investors, his silence appeared strategic, as though he were letting them form their own conclusions. To Ha-ri, however, it felt like a chain, binding her, tightening around her with every note she played. The following morning, the office was abuzz. By now, the story of the assistant pianist had traveled far beyond their company. A business magazine had even posted a brief mention. Unexpected talent revealed at Hanenli dinner. CEO's assistant astonishes elite crowd with moving performance. Colleagues greeted her with double takes, some with envy, others with open curiosity. No one ignored her anymore. Ha-ri, is it true you trained at a conservatory? Did you used to compete? Why are you hiding that kind of skill? She offered no answers, only polite smiles. Inside, her stomach twisted tighter with every question. She wanted to crawl back into the safety of invisibility. At noon, her phone buzzed with a summons. CEO's office. Immediately, she entered to find Jae-won standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. The skyline stretched vast and glittering beyond the glass, but his attention was elsewhere. "You played well," he said without turning. "Thank you, sir," she murmured. "Sit." She obeyed, waiting as he finally turned to face her. His expression was calm, his voice even, yet she sensed the weight beneath his words. "The investors are talking. They were impressed. Some have already requested that you perform again." Her chest tightened. "Mr. Kang, He raised a hand, silencing her. "Do not misunderstand. This is not a matter of entertainment. It is about influence. They see something rare in you, and that reflects on me. It strengthens my position." Her breath caught. "So I'm another strategy?" He studied her in silence, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw conflict flicker in his eyes. Then it was gone. "You will attend another event tomorrow evening," he said. "And next week, there is a charity function. Prepare accordingly." She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no use resisting. The decision had been made. That night, alone in her small apartment, Ha-ri sat again at her old piano. Her fingers touched the keys hesitantly, each note stirring ghosts of her past. She remembered the competition halls, the rehearsals until her fingers ached, the way her father had dismissed it all as a childish hobby. And she remembered the day it all ended. The day her family could no longer afford lessons, the day reality demanded she choose stability over dreams. She had walked away from the piano, promising never to look back. Yet here it was again, forcing its way back into her life. And behind it stood a man who terrified and unsettled her more than anyone else. Why him? Why now? Her reflection in the dusty black surface of the piano lid seemed like that of a stranger, someone fragile, caught between two lives. She pressed her hands against her face, whispering to herself, "I cannot survive this. And yet, I cannot refuse." In the days that followed, Jae-won tested her in ways she did not expect. At meetings, he asked her to take notes while simultaneously preparing reports. At luncheons, he demanded she anticipate his needs without instruction. He pushed her to exhaustion, as though determined to see where she would break. And yet, through it all, he never once mentioned the coffee-stained contract that had begun this spiral. It was as if her punishment had already been repurposed into something else, something neither of them fully understood. At times, she caught glimpses of him she had not seen before. A fleeting smile at a colleague's clever remark. A moment of silence as his gaze drifted to the piano in a hotel lobby. A shadow in his eyes when music played faintly from a passing car. She began to wonder, what was hidden behind his armor of control? What wound did he carry, so carefully concealed? One afternoon, as she sorted files in the archive room, Park Ji-eun slipped inside, closing the door behind her. "Ha-ri," Ji-eun whispered, excitement in her voice. "I heard from one of the managers. The CEO has been rearranging schedules just to bring you to events. Do you realize what that means?" Ha-ri shook her head, uneasy. "It means I'm being used." Ji-eun frowned gently. "Or maybe it means he sees something in you. Something more than the rest of us see." Ha-ri laughed bitterly. "He doesn't see me. He sees an image that benefits him." "Are you sure?" Ji-eun asked softly. Because when he looks at you in those meetings, it doesn't look like strategy. It looks like hesitation. Ha-ri froze, her heart stuttering. She wanted to dismiss the thought, but part of her knew Ji-eun was not wrong. That night, she lay awake replaying those words. Hesitation. What could possibly make a man like Jae-won hesitate? 2 weeks passed in a blur of events, music, and silent tension. Ha-ri became the unexpected jewel of the company's gatherings. Investors lingered longer, charmed not only by her playing but by the contrast between her quiet demeanor and the fire in her music. And with every performance, Jae-won's composure cracked a little more. He still barked orders, still demanded perfection. But in the stolen moments when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. She tried to deny it. She told herself he was her boss, nothing more. She reminded herself of his cruelty, his coldness. Yet when she closed her eyes at night, she remembered not his harsh words, but the way he had listened, truly listened, when she played. And for the first time in years, she wondered if music might not be her enemy after all. One evening, after yet another event, Jae-won offered her a ride home. She hesitated, then accepted, too weary to refuse. The car was silent, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Finally, he spoke. "You've improved." She blinked. "Improved?" "Since the gala. You're playing. It's stronger." Her hands tightened in her lap. "I'm only doing what you asked." He glanced at her, his jaw tightening. "That's not what I mean." The car slowed at a red light. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the engine. Then he said quietly, "When you play, it reminds me of something I lost a long time ago." Her breath caught. She wanted to ask what, but before she could, the light changed, and he turned away, closing himself off once again. She stared out the window, her heart thudding, questions burning in her chest. Who was this man, really? And why did she feel as though every note she played was slowly unraveling the walls around him? The following week brought with it another gala, this time hosted at one of Seoul's most luxurious hotels. Crystal staircases curved like ribbons of light, and tables dressed in ivory linen stretched across the hall. The hum of conversation buzzed like bees in a hive, investors greeting one another with false smiles, each trying to outshine the next. Eun Ha-ri stood near the entrance, her dress plain compared to the glittering gowns around her. She kept her hands clasped, trying to steady her nerves. This would be her 4th performance since the night of her punishment. Yet the dread did not lessen. If anything, it grew heavier. Knowing eyes would measure her not as a mistake-prone assistant, but as a source of spectacle. She had almost refused this time. For days, she rehearsed in her apartment, each note stirring a storm of memories she tried to suppress. The piano, once her comfort, had become her burden. And still, she played. Because walking away meant losing the only job she had, the only way to survive. As she lingered in the shadows, she felt it again. The weight of Kang Jae-won's gaze. He was across the room, speaking with a cluster of executives. His posture was perfect, his words measured, but his eyes sought her out as if he knew she was shrinking away. When their eyes met, she looked down immediately, her pulse racing. A server passed with a tray of champagne. Ha-ri took one, more to occupy her trembling hands than to drink. But the moment she lifted the glass, she heard whispers behind her. "She's the assistant, isn't she? The one who played at the dinner. I heard the CEO himself insisted she performed tonight." Their voices carried a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She pressed the glass back onto the tray and walked away, cheeks burning. The evening blurred until it was her turn. The host introduced her with dramatic flair. "And now we are honored to welcome once again Miss Eun Ha-ri, whose music enchanted us all." Polite applause followed, though she heard skepticism in some claps, boredom in others. She walked to the piano, each step echoing in her ears. She sat, closed her eyes, and began. This time, the music was softer, more vulnerable. It carried the exhaustion of nights spent awake. the loneliness of a woman who never asked to be seen. Notes spilled like confessions she could not speak aloud, trembling at first, then firming into something that demanded to be heard. The room fell quiet. Forks lowered, glasses stilled. She no longer noticed the crowd. The music carried her somewhere else, somewhere only she and the piano existed. When the final note faded, silence lingered once more before applause swept the room. She bowed, quickly leaving the stage. But as she stepped aside, she found Jae-won waiting in the shadows. "You play differently tonight," he said. Her breath caught. There was sorrow in it. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you hiding, Ha-ri?" Her lips parted, then closed. What could she say? That every note was a battle against herself? That her music was the very thing she feared most? Instead, she bowed and whispered, "Excuse me, sir." Then she fled before he could stop her. The ride back to the office later that night was tense. Ha-ri sat across from Jae-won in the car, her hands clenched in her lap. He worked silently on his tablet, though she noticed he never once scrolled past the same page. His jaw was tight, his focus fractured. At last, he spoke without looking at her. "Do you plan to quit?" Her heart lurched. "Quit? You've been restless. Your work is precise, but your eyes—" He finally looked at her. "They carry fear. I can see it." She swallowed. "If I'm not meeting expectations—" "That's not what I said." His voice sharpened, then softened unexpectedly. "I am asking, do you plan to leave?" The question unsettled her more than a command would have. She looked out the window, unable to answer. The next day, the whispers in the office grew louder. Some colleagues speculated openly. Maybe she's his mistress. No, he's not that kind of man. It's something else. Whatever it is, she's getting more attention than any of us ever will. Ha-ri forced herself to ignore them, but the sting of their words clung to her skin. She considered resignation seriously for the first time. If she left now, perhaps she could reclaim the quiet life she once had. That evening, she drafted a letter. She stared at the words, fingers trembling over the keyboard. "I hereby tender my resignation." But before she could finish, a knock sounded at her apartment door. Startled, she opened it to find Park Ji-un, holding a small bag of snacks. "Surprise," Ji-un said with a smile. "I thought you could use some company." Ha-ri blinked, then laughed softly, the tension easing for the first time all day. "You always seem to know." They sat together, eating chips from the bag, talking quietly. Ji-un listened as Ha-ri confessed her doubts, her exhaustion, her temptation to quit. "Maybe I'm not strong enough for this," Ha-ri whispered. Ji-un shook her head. "You're stronger than you think. I see it every time you sit at that piano. You're not just playing, Ha-ri. You're fighting. And honestly, I think the CEO sees it too." Ha-ri's chest tightened. "He only sees what benefits him." "Maybe at first," Ji-un said gently. "But not now. Not with the way he looks at you." The following week brought a turning point. At a high-profile charity gala, Ha-ri was once again asked to perform. She played beautifully. But midway through the evening, a rival executive, Lee Min-ho, made a cutting remark within earshot of several guests. "Remarkable that the CEO's assistant can play," Min-ho said smoothly. "But isn't it a little unprofessional to parade her like this? Surely Han and Lee can afford a real musician." Gasps rippled through the group. Ha-ri froze, humiliation flooding her cheeks. Before she could retreat, Jae-won stepped forward. His tone was calm, but his eyes burned. "Miss Ha-ri is not here to amuse you, Mr. Lee. She is here because true talent is not bound by profession. And unlike some, I know how to recognize value when I see it." The silence that followed was heavy. Min-ho's smirk faltered as the crowd shifted, now murmuring in Ha-ri's favor. For the first time, Jae-won had defended her. Not as a tool, not as a strategy, but as someone worth protecting. Her breath caught, her heart pounding. In that moment, she saw a man who was not just her cold, ruthless employer, but someone capable of something far more dangerous. Someone capable of care. The charity gala shimmered with grandeur. Chandeliers sparkled above, violins played softly in the background, and tables groaned beneath towers of crystal glasses. It was a night designed not only for generosity, but for prestige. The wealthiest came not just to give, but to be seen giving. Eun Ha-ri stood at the edge of the hall, her palms damp against the folds of her dress. Each event seemed more daunting than the last. Tonight, dozens of journalists lingered at the fringes, their cameras ready. The whispers about her had grown louder each week, and she knew the world outside Han and Lee was beginning to notice. She had begged herself to stop, to resign, to walk away, but something held her here. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps it was survival, or perhaps, though she barely admitted it, it was the way Kang Jae-won looked at her when she played. That look unsettled her more than the stares of 100 strangers. The evening unfolded in glitter and chatter. Guests moved like dancers in a play, laughter echoing beneath the music. Ha-ri busied herself with trays, papers, and instructions, duties of an assistant she clung to desperately, as though they might erase the weight of expectation. But she knew her time was coming. The grand piano at the center of the hall gleamed like an accusation. When the host finally announced her, applause scattered politely. Some guests leaned forward eagerly, others smirked in anticipation of gossip. Ha-ri walked to the piano, her knees threatening to give way beneath her. She sat, drew a long breath, and began. The melody flowed, gentle, mournful, then swelling with passion. Each note was a fragment of her story, secrets woven into sound. For a few blessed moments, she forgot the crowd. She remembered only her mother's voice urging her to never abandon the music of her heart. But as she reached the crescendo, a sharp, discordant noise shattered the air. The strings snapped beneath her finger. A cruel twang echoed through the hall, silencing the melody mid-breath. Gasps erupted. Whispers surged like a wave. Ha-ri froze, her hands hovering. Someone had tampered with the instrument. She could feel it. The uneven tension in the strings. The sabotage designed to humiliate her in front of everyone. Her throat tightened. This was worse than spilling coffee. Worse than every mistake before. She wanted to run, and then she heard him. Continue. The voice was low, commanding, and it cut through the murmurs like a blade. She looked up. Across the room, Jae-won's eyes were locked on hers. His expression was unyielding, but beneath it flickered something else. Defiance. Continue, he repeated, his voice steadier, louder. Ha-ri's pulse raced. She could stop now, retreat into the shadows forever. Or she could obey. Her fingers trembled, then pressed down. She adapted, shifting keys, weaving around the broken string. The melody faltered, then found new life. The imperfection became its own kind of beauty, raw, honest, alive. By the time she finished, the whole was silent, awestruck. Then the applause came, louder than any she had ever received. But not everyone was pleased. Near the back of the hall, Lee Min-ho smirked, whispering to a companion. Ha-ri saw it, and shame threatened to overwhelm her. But before she could lower her eyes, Jae-won stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room, "you have just witnessed more than a performance. You have witnessed resilience. Anyone can play flawlessly when the stage is perfect. But to play through sabotage, to turn failure into music." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the crowd. "That is true strength." Gasps echoed. Heads turned toward Min-ho, whose smirk faltered. The implication was clear, though Jae-won never named him. Ha-ri's breath caught. For the second time he had defended her, not out of cold calculation but with unmistakable conviction. Applause thundered again, now for both of them. And for the first time, She felt as though she were not standing alone. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Ha-ri lingered by the balcony, her heart still racing. The city lights glittered below, endless and unreachable. She hugged herself, wondering how she had survived such humiliation, and why it somehow felt like triumph. A presence stirred behind her. She turned to find Jae-won, his expression unreadable as always. "You adapted," he said simply. "I had no choice," she whispered. "There is always a choice," he replied. "And you chose not to surrender." Her chest tightened. "Why did you defend me?" For a moment, silence stretched between them. The cool night air rustled her hair as he regarded her. "Because they were wrong," he said at last, "and I do not stand by when something of value is being trampled." Her breath trembled. She wanted to thank him, but words failed. Instead, she bowed slightly and turned away, afraid of what his eyes might reveal if she lingered too long. That night, lying in bed, she replayed every moment. The broken string, his command to continue, the way he had spoken for her. Her heart refused to calm. It was dangerous, she told herself. To feel anything toward a man like him was to court disaster. He was her boss. He was ruthless. He was untouchable. And yet, she could not forget the way he had looked at her on that stage, as though her music had torn open something buried deep inside him. Meanwhile, Jae-won sat alone in his office, long after the gala ended. The city glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but his gaze was fixed on the memory of Ha-ri at the piano. Her music haunted him, but tonight it was something else. The defiance in her eyes, the strength he had not expected. He had seen countless men and women crumble under pressure, but she had endured, reshaping disaster into beauty. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He poured a glass of water, though his hands betrayed the faintest tremor. What was she doing to him? Stories like Ha-ri's remind us of something powerful. Resilience is often born in the very moments designed to break us. If you've been moved by this turning point in her journey, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. Here, every story brings not only romance and drama, but also lessons of courage, hope, and second chances. By subscribing, you won't miss the moments that make us reflect on our own lives, and perhaps even find strength in them. The next days at the office carried a strange, charged energy. Ha-ri noticed colleagues glancing at her differently, no longer with suspicion, but with reluctant respect. Even those who had whispered cruelly now fell silent when she passed. But with the respect came fear. She could feel it. They saw her not only as the assistant, but as someone who now stood too close to the untouchable CEO. And Jae-won. He was no less demanding, but something had shifted. He no longer watched her with cold detachment. His gaze lingered, heavy, questioning, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle she carried inside her soul. Ha-ri felt the walls around her trembling. She told herself she could still walk away, that she should walk away. But in her heart, she knew it was already too late. The days following the charity gala felt strangely altered, as if the air itself in the Han and Lee offices had shifted. Whispers no longer carried ridicule. Instead, they held awe, even caution. Colleagues watched Eun Ha-ri with something approaching respect, though she knew envy simmered just beneath their polite facades. Her desk, once invisible in the corner of the floor, had become a point of silent curiosity. Papers arrived on time, her files perfectly arranged. But still she caught glances when she walked through the halls. The same people who once forgot her name now lowered their voices as she passed. She hated the attention, hated the way it made her feel both exposed and utterly alone. And Kang Jae-won, though he remained demanding, exacting, and cold in meetings, had changed in ways only she could sense. His gaze lingered too long. His silences stretched too heavy. His words, though sharp, carried a subtle undertone that unsettled her more than anger ever had. She told herself not to read into it. He was her boss. He was the CEO, untouchable. Any line blurred between them would mean disaster. And yet, when she lay in bed at night, she could not banish the image of him defending her, of his voice cutting through a hall full of power to shield her. It was dangerous, and she feared her heart was not strong enough to resist. One evening, after a long meeting, Jae-won called her into his office. The skyline glowed behind him, the city a sea of glittering lights. He stood by the window, jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms, a rare sight of him not perfectly armored in formality. "You've been quiet," he said without turning. She shifted nervously. "I don't wish to cause distraction." He turned then, his gaze steady. "You're already a distraction." Her breath caught. The words struck her like a confession, though his tone remained unreadable. "I mean," he continued smoothly, "to others. They speak of you, investors, colleagues. They are curious. Curiosity is dangerous in business." Ha-ri's heart stuttered, though she managed to bow her head. "Then perhaps I should resign." The words slipped out before she could stop them. For the first time, she saw something break across his face. Alarm, quickly masked. "No," he said firmly. "You will not resign." She stared at him, stunned by the sharpness of his tone. "Why?" she whispered. His jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice dropped lower. "Because I have not finished understanding you." Silence hung heavy between them. Ha-ri's pulse raced, her mind screaming to look away. Yet she could not. His eyes held her captive, burning with questions she dared not answer. At last, he dismissed her with a curt nod. But as she left, her heart pounded with a truth she could not admit. Something was growing between them, fragile and dangerous as flame. It was at the next board dinner that the danger became real. As Ha-ri left the restroom, she nearly collided with a tall man in the corridor. He was sharply dressed, his smile charming, but his eyes too sharp, too calculating. "Miss Eun Ha-ri, isn't it?" he said smoothly. She bowed politely. "Yes, sir." Choi Sung-ho. He introduced himself, extending a hand. "Investor. I've heard fascinating things about you." She hesitated, shaking his hand briefly. "I only assist Mr. Kang." "Is that what you call it?" His smile widened. "An assistant who plays the piano like a virtuoso? Intriguing. Tell me, Miss Eun, why does someone like you hide in the shadows of an office?" Her stomach twisted. "Excuse me, I should return." But he stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice. "You know, secrets have a way of surfacing, and if I were you, I'd be careful. The past has a long memory." Her breath caught. She froze, searching his eyes. He knew. Somehow he knew something. Before she could respond, footsteps approached. Jae-won appeared, his expression darkening as he spotted them. "Sung-ho," Jae-won said curtly. "What business do you have with my assistant?" Choi Sung-ho smiled easily, as though nothing had passed. "Merely introducing myself. She is memorable." Jae-won's jaw tightened. "Then you've made your introduction. That will be enough?" The two men locked eyes, silent sparks of rivalry flaring between them. The air itself seemed charged, as though two predators had crossed paths in the same territory. Finally, Sung-ho bowed slightly and walked away, his smirk lingering. Ha-ri's heart pounded. She felt Jae-won's gaze on her, heavy and searching. "What did he say to you?" Jae-won asked. "Nothing," she whispered, too shaken to explain. But the truth weighed heavily. Someone knew her past. And if it was revealed, it could destroy everything. Not just her, but perhaps even Jae-won's reputation. The following days were suffocating. Every time Ha-ri sat at the piano, she feared Sung-ho's eyes watching from the shadows. Every whispered compliment felt laced with suspicion. She wanted to flee, to disappear before her past could be used against her. At night, she lay awake replaying his words. The past has a long memory. What did he mean? What did he know? Her mind churned with possibilities. The competition she had abandoned, the failures her family had hidden, the debt that had shadowed her childhood. Any of it could be twisted into a weapon. But then she would see Jae-won in the boardroom, commanding, untouchable, yet watching her with that same unreadable intensity, and she could not move. One late evening, as she packed files, he entered the office quietly. "You're afraid," he said. She startled. "Sir? Since that night with Sung-ho, you've changed." His voice softened. "What is he holding over you?" Her lips parted, but fear clamped them shut. She could not tell him, not yet. Instead, she bowed her head. "It's nothing." Jae-won stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You are lying, and I do not tolerate lies." Her chest tightened, tears stinging her eyes. "Then fire me." The words shocked them both. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then, in a voice quieter than she had ever heard, he said, "If I fire you, Ha-ri, I lose something I cannot replace." Her breath trembled. She dared not look up because if she did, she feared she would see not the ruthless CEO, but the man who was slowly, dangerously, falling for her. The city outside her apartment seemed louder that night. Cars rushing, neon signs flickering, voices echoing through narrow alleys. Ha-ri walked home with her coat pulled tight, as though it might shield her from the storm inside. At her building, she paused by the piano in the lobby. A tenant's child had been plinking at the keys earlier, leaving the cover open. She hesitated, then pressed one key. The sound was faint, imperfect, yet it vibrated through her chest like truth. Her reflection in the glossy surface showed a woman she barely recognized, caught between fear and something dangerously close to longing. She whispered to herself, "If he learns the truth, it will end everything." And yet, the part of her she tried hardest to silence asked another question. What if he already knows, and still chooses me? Across town, in his penthouse, Jae-won sat with a glass of untouched whiskey. The file he had been reading lay forgotten. His thoughts circled endlessly back to her. Her silence tormented him. What was she hiding? Why did Sung-ho look at her with that knowing smirk? He despised not having answers. And yet, what unsettled him more was the realization that he no longer sought those answers out of strategy. He sought them because he cared. That word alone was dangerous. He set the glass down sharply, the sound echoing in the quiet room. He had built his empire by locking away weakness. But tonight, staring out at the city lights, he admitted to himself what he could not admit to anyone else. Eun Ha-ri had become his weakness. The tension that had been brewing finally broke like a storm. Whispers filled the office after Choi Sung-ho's pointed remarks at the board dinner. Though no one spoke openly, Ha-ri felt it in the air. Every glance lingered too long. Every pause in conversation seemed to land on her. She was no longer invisible, and now, she was no longer untouchable either. One afternoon, while reviewing schedules at her desk, she received an envelope with no sender's name. Her stomach sank as she opened it. Inside lay a single photograph. Her, years ago, seated at a piano on a competition stage. Her name printed below in bold, followed by a headline she had prayed never to see again. Prodigy walks away after scandal. Family debt and broken promises. Her blood ran cold. She remembered the article. It had been the cruelest blow of her youth, when her family's financial ruin had forced her to abandon the world she loved. The press had twisted the story, painting her not as a victim, but as a failure, a girl who had wasted her talent. Now, it was back, and someone wanted her to know they could use it. That evening she entered Jae-won's office with trembling hands, the envelope clutched against her chest. He looked up from his desk, his eyes immediately narrowing. "What is it?" She hesitated, then placed the photograph before him. His gaze flicked down, then up at her. His expression did not change, but his silence felt heavier than any words. "Where did you get this?" he asked at last. "It was left for me." He leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Sung-ho." Ha-ri's voice shook. "He knows everything. If he shows this, he won't." Jae-won's tone was clipped, sharp with authority. "You can't be certain." "I said he won't." His eyes locked onto hers, fierce. "Not while I stand in his way." Her breath caught. But beneath her fear, something else stirred. An ache she dared not name. The following days blurred with unease. At every event, Ha-ri felt Sung-ho's gaze like a shadow. He spoke little, but his smirk said enough. "I hold your fate in my hands." And yet, through it all, Jae-won remained steady, a silent shield. He positioned himself near her, intercepting conversations, making it clear she was under his protection. Still, she could not shake the thought. What if her presence endangered him? Late one night, she sat at her apartment piano, tears spilling onto the keys. She whispered into the empty room, "I should leave. If I stay, I'll ruin him." The next morning, she was gone. When Jae-won arrived at the office, her desk was empty. Files neatly stacked, drawers cleared. Panic, an emotion he had not felt since boyhood, jolted through him. He summoned Ji-eun immediately. "Where is she?" Ji-eun's eyes widened. She called me last night. She said she was leaving the city. I thought she'd told you." The words hit like ice water. She had left. Without a word. Without giving him the chance to stop her. For the rest of the day, he was a man split in two. To the board, he was the same cold strategist, delivering figures and forecasts with flawless precision. But inside, a storm raged. He could not focus. He could not breathe. That night, he drove aimlessly through the city, his car slicing through neon-lit streets. Every turn reminded him of her, the cafes she passed on her way to work, the bridges where she lingered to stare at the river. Finally, he found himself outside her apartment building. Lights off, curtains drawn, empty. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Ha-ri, meanwhile, sat on a bus headed out of Seoul. The city lights dwindled behind her, replaced by the dark stretch of highway. She clutched her bag tightly, heart breaking with every mile. She told herself she was protecting him, that if she disappeared, Sung-ho would lose his leverage, that Jae-won's empire would remain untouched. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was running not just from Sung-ho, but from the feelings she could no longer deny. The memory of Jae-won's voice haunted her. "If I fire you, Ha-ri, I lose something I cannot replace." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her forehead against the window, whispering, "Then why does it feel like I'm the one losing everything?" 2 days passed. The office functioned as always, but those closest to Jae-won noticed a shift. He was harsher, quicker to anger, his patience razor thin. Investors whispered that something had unsettled him. On the 3rd day, during a meeting, his phone buzzed with a message. No name, only a location. An old concert hall on the edge of the city. Beneath it, 3 words. "Come for her." His blood chilled. Sung-ho. That evening he arrived at the hall. The building was half abandoned, its glory days long past. Dusty curtains hung limp, and broken seats lined the aisles. But in the center on the stage stood Ha-ri, her figure small beneath the vast crumbling ceiling. Sung-ho leaned casually against the piano, smiling. "Mr. Kang," he said smoothly, "I knew you would come." Jae-won's eyes flicked to Ha-ri, then back to Sung-ho, shaken. "Let her go." "Of course," Sung-ho said with mock innocence. "But first, we should discuss terms. The world would love to hear the story of your assistant's little scandal, don't you think? Unless," his smirk widened, "unless you make it worth my silence." Jae-won's jaw tightened. "Name your price." "Price?" Sung-ho chuckled. No. This isn't about money. It's about leverage, about watching the great Kang Jae-won scramble to protect someone beneath him. He stepped closer to Ha-ri, who flinched. Why her, I wonder? Out of all the women in Seoul, why this one? Because she is worth more than you will ever understand, Jae-won said coldly. The hall fell silent. Even Sung-ho seemed momentarily taken aback by the conviction in his voice. Ha-ri's heart pounded, tears springing to her eyes. For the first time, he had spoken the truth aloud. That night ended with threats unfulfilled. Sung-ho, sensing he had pushed too far, retreated with promises that the game was not over. But for Ha-ri, the moment had already changed everything. On the drive back, silence filled the car. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you come?" Jae-won's hands tightened on the wheel. His voice was low, raw. "Because losing you is the one outcome I cannot allow." Her tears fell silently, each one a note in the unfinished song between them. The city was quiet the next morning, but inside Eun Ha-ri's chest, storms still raged. She had not slept after the confrontation at the abandoned hall. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Choi Sung-ho's smirk, heard his threats, felt the weight of her past pressing down. But above all, she heard Jae-won's voice. "Because losing you is the one outcome I cannot allow." The words echoed relentlessly. They had been spoken not as a strategy, not as a command, but as truth, and it terrified her more than any threat ever could. At the office, whispers swirled. Everyone sensed something had shifted. Jae-won was colder than ever in meetings, sharper, almost ruthless. Yet beneath the surface, those who knew him well sensed a man holding something back. A man whose focus faltered when his eyes lingered on the empty chair beside his. For days, Ha-ri avoided him. She answered calls, filed documents, even played when required, but always from a distance. She convinced herself it was safer this way, for both of them. Until the night of the final gala arrived. It was the company's crowning event of the year, a celebration of Han and Lee's success, broadcast to an audience far beyond Seoul. Politicians, celebrities, investors, all would be there. And at the center of it, once again, stood the grand piano. Ha-ri considered refusing. She told herself she could feign illness, disappear again, vanish before Sung-ho or anyone else could strike. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw not the timid assistant she once was, but a woman who had survived humiliation, sabotage, and fear. Perhaps it was time to stop running. The hall was breathtaking. Crystal lights glittering like stars, velvet curtains drawn high. Cameras flashed as guests entered, their jewels glinting under the chandeliers. Ha-ri walked slowly toward the stage, every step a battle. She could feel Sung-ho's gaze somewhere in the crowd, though he did not dare approach openly tonight. More than that, she felt Jae-won's eyes. He stood near the front, posture rigid, but his gaze was steady, unblinking, fixed entirely on her. She sat at the piano. The keys gleamed beneath the lights. For a moment, fear threatened to consume her, and then she remembered his words. "Losing you is the one outcome I cannot allow." Her fingers touched the keys. The music that poured forth was unlike anything she had ever played before. It was no longer sorrow alone, no longer defiance. It was everything. Pain, fear, hope, longing, love. Notes rose like confessions, like promises, filling the hall with a truth she could never speak aloud. The audience stilled, enraptured. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. When the final chord echoed, silence lingered for a heartbeat, then erupted into thunderous applause. Guests rose to their feet. The ovation was not polite, not forced. It was raw, moved by something greater than spectacle. And in the center of it all, Jae-won's eyes shone with something unguarded at last. Later, as the crowd mingled and congratulated, Ha-ri slipped to a quiet balcony. She needed air, space, something to steady her pounding heart. The city stretched endlessly below, a sea of lights. She closed her eyes, letting the cool night wind brush her skin. Running again? Her eyes flew open. Jae-won stood behind her, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable, but his voice softer than she had ever heard. She turned away, clutching the railing. I can't keep doing this. Doing what? This, living in fear, playing while everyone whispers, waiting for Sung-ho to ruin me. I'm tired, Mr. Kang. I can't. He stepped closer. Then don't do it alone. Her breath caught. He moved beside her, his gaze on the glittering skyline. I built my life believing strength meant isolation. That to protect what was mine, I had to stand alone. But when you disappeared, I realized isolation is not strength. It's emptiness. Her throat tightened. He turned to her fully. For once, no walls remained. His voice trembled with the weight of honesty. You asked why I defended you, why I came for you. It's because you are the only one who's ever reached the part of me I buried long ago. The part that still remembers music, warmth, love. Tears filled her eyes. I can't promise it will be easy, he continued. But if you'll let me, I will fight every shadow, every threat to keep you safe. Her lips trembled. She wanted to believe him, wanted to surrender, but fear still lingered. What if Sung-ho destroys everything? She whispered. Then let him try, Jae-won said firmly. Because together, we are stronger than anything he holds over you. And for the first time, she believed him. Weeks later, another event was held. Not a gala, not a board dinner, but a concert organized in the company's name. This time, Ha-ri was not introduced as an assistant. She was introduced as herself. When she walked to the piano, Jae-won was beside her, not as her employer, but as the man who stood unashamedly proud of her. Cameras flashed, but she no longer feared them. She sat at the piano, glanced once at him, and then began to play. The hall filled with music that was no longer hidden, no longer ashamed. It was her truth, her gift, her heart. And in the audience, people did not see a scandal, nor a strategy, but a woman who had risen from humiliation to hope. As the final applause filled the air, Jae-won took her hand, guiding her to stand beside him. The world was watching, but he did not care. His voice carried steady and sure. This is Eun Ha-ri, not my assistant, not my punishment. She is the woman who reminded me that strength is not silence, but the courage to be heard. The hall erupted. Ha-ri's tears sparkled beneath the lights, but for the first time, they were tears of joy. Later that night, standing once more on a balcony, she turned to him with a smile that trembled but did not falter. I never thought my punishment would lead me here. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his eyes gentle. Sometimes the punishment meant to break us is the very thing that saves us. And under the city's endless glow, they stood together, not CEO and assistant, not prisoner and captor, but two souls who had finally found one another. Life has a way of turning humiliation into revelation. What was meant to crush Eun Ha-ri revealed her strength. What was meant to test Kang Jae-won revealed his heart. Together they discovered that resilience and love often appear in the unlikeliest places. And now, I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Ha-ri's place, would you have forgiven Jae-won after everything he put her through? Or if you were Jae-won, would you have risked your empire for someone like her? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to know what you would have done. And if this story touched you, make sure to subscribe. Each story we share brings not only romance and drama, but also lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. By subscribing, you ensure you won't miss the next journey that just might speak to your own